These are the metaphysical teachings of P. L. Swan.
Hey, it's PL. So today I'd like to talk about consciousness and culture, spiritual awakening, and human culture and relationship. Um, Obviously, a spiritual journey is not about how the world sees us, but at the same time, a true spiritual journey and then a broader human consciousness evolution and awakening does have to do with the world that we live in and the cultures that we create. And although the individual spiritual journey is meaningful apart from the world, a greater human awakening and transformation of culture is also meaningful and important. Today, we live in a time when it just seems like there's so much insecurity, opposition, anger, fear, division, and just change in the global culture. And it certainly makes one wonder, just in the human sense, how we move forward as a human race towards something better. There's a lot of people working for change, trying to make the world, quote unquote, a better place. But the problems that we see are very deep, and as I like to quote, the Einstein quote, you can't solve a problem at the level of consciousness at which it was created. That is true for our time. And so as individuals seek their soul identity, seek to know their most essential self, and then come into a relationship with others who are authentically trying to be who they truly are, to be their deepest self, then we can move toward actually creating a truly better conscious culture that can make a real difference in the world. One thing I talk about is, recognizing the difference between ego and spirit. There are certain traits that you can recognize. Ego is always insecure, it's always judgmental, it's always afraid of that which is different and other views, and it always tries to demonize those who see things differently. Soul loves what is different, and it's always trying to uplift everyone, even those who are in the wrong. Of course, it's challenging what is wrong. A spiritual person will seek to challenge what is harmful in the world, but the spiritual individual will do so with compassion and with an inherent willingness to always forgive and lift up anyone at any time that they are willing to change their ways, repent, and become part of a more conscious culture. So when you look at people working for change, you see so much of that taking place at a level of ego, in which if we're in the right, quote unquote, if we see ourselves as being right and the other as being wrong, we use that concept to justify hatred. And people might say that it's anger, but often it's hatred. You can always tell the difference because anger is a temporary thing. You might get angry, I might get angry, anyone might get angry, but then when you step back from a situation or a moment, you can be compassionate and forgiving. Whereas hatred, it might appear the same as anger, but it lasts. It's a way that you view someone even outside of particular moments and situations. You continually view them as worthless. You dehumanize them in your mind based upon your concept that they are in the wrong. And you see a lot of that, and this does not help, because when we have this attitude, we simply invite war. And maybe we think we can win a war, and maybe we'll lose, but we are inviting war, and we are propagating cycles of war, whether they are outright armed conflict or culture war, or what I call culture civil war of our time. When we think we are justified in dehumanizing and hating others, based on their being in the wrong, we are propagating more, and we are not offering a true solution that can move humanity forward into a better and more conscious human culture. What would be a better and more conscious human culture? Really, it's hard to like try to say what that would look like on a global level, but I can say just on a smaller level, of say intentional community, it would really look like something very varied, very honest, and very non-judgmental. I'm very accepting of the variation of human desire and belief. I'm a big fan of intentional community as a movement. I think there's a lot of issues with particular communities, but I think in general, part of an awakening humanity, creating a better human culture, will begin on the grassroots with individual intentional communities seeking to model consciousness, which does occur. I mean, there are some genuine positive communities in the world, not as many as there could be. But in my view, a conscious and spiritual community would allow for a real variation of human desires and beliefs and just wishes. So I feel like there's a lot of judgment in intentional community movements toward mainstream cultural structures, such as people having, private property, such as there being various levels of power. But for myself, I actually see that as natural to community. I see it as natural that we have leaders, those in individual and differentiated roles. I think that happens even in communities which don't like to think it's happening, and it happens in a less honest way because there is not an acknowledgement. But I see conscious community not as some egalitarian ideal that tries to make everyone believe in the same model. But, excuse me, I see it as offering various levels where people can fit in different ways to different degrees. But the one thing that I think would define conscious community and will hopefully eventually define human culture as a whole is that everyone will always have some place that is not, degrading and horrifying like the condition of homelessness in mainstream society today. Everyone would always have some place. They would always know that whether they were, able to work their way into the heart of a community, that they would always have some place, at least on the edges of things, that was compassionate, that was not dehumanizing or degrading. But that will be, I think, another video in terms of the specifics of intentional community models, because this is something I have great interest in, and this is something I do hope to develop in the future as an example of what I think conscious community could be. But as a whole, I just want to say, human culture is amazing. It has so much potential. I really have an issue with people who are wanting to change, but they do it in a way that just acts as though there's nothing good about, human culture as it is, or, I live in America, and say American culture specifically, or say people in, other parts of the world, say in Europe or Asia or something, people who dismiss what is instead of taking what is and using that as a foundation to move forward to something better. Because I really like the variation that does exist within culture. And of course there could be more, and I think an awakening humanity would create far more variation of experience, of expression. But it wouldn't do so by trying to prevent what already is, or prevent certain things that, might not jibe with a new view of human nature. That's not the direction to go in. Sort of, this would be an aside, but sort of, touching on the censorship culture that we see today, where people don't just want the right to do their own thing, they want to shut down anyone who might see things differently. And that's not the answer, because that, as we have seen, is definitely in the pattern of ego rather than the pattern of soul. The soul loves what's good in whatever exists, but it's seeking to move forward into something more aware and awakened and lucid. And individuals coming from a place of soul are going to be focused more on the creation of what they desire, the expression of what they want to express, rather than, tearing down what exists. That will fade in time when we have something better to replace it. I like to look at it as being in a ship on a stormy sea. And the ship has been built over a great many years. It's dysfunctional. It could have been built better. It has all kinds of archaic parts to it that don't work so well anymore. But it still is floating. And it would be the most foolish thing imaginable to just start to tear apart the ship because it's very dysfunctional and imperfect. The wise thing to do would be to focus entirely on building a ship within the ship that exists, a better ship, a higher ship, a more conscious ship, and then as that ship forms, to allow the old to fall apart on its own, or to, even once you have that, to, begin to clear away what was before. But I think looking at spiritual awakening and human culture, if humanity can move toward a collective awakening, we will see a new explosion of grassroots culture, grassroots community, grassroots alliances, that will be greater than what we saw in the 60s, greater than what we saw in the Renaissance. I think we have the potential, with the internet, with technology, with information, and with our ability to span the globe, to travel so swiftly from one place of the planet to another. I think we have the potential to bring something new into being, even as we as individuals, hopefully more and more of us, move into our own personal awakening, coming to know our soul nature, to identify as souls, to seek others who do the same, to seek authentic relationship with those who are also awakening to an authentic spiritual experience. That then we can see a new culture begin to form, which is free, truly free, not judging what came before, not judging those who aren't free, but just thriving and growing in its own incredible joy of the possibility of creative consciousness and what that can do. That will be the hallmark of what is to come. That's something I would love to be a part of.